Stories help fill the missing pieces of our lives. That the pathway to healing, self acceptance, peace, love, joy, and abundance. Connecting communities through culture, stories, food, and faith is something that brings our community into the fold as we have conversations with guests that we believe will resonate with our audience. My name is Izioma Anosike. This is Connecting Communities.
And my name is Namsa Para. It is such a pleasure to be here today. Today is going to be very interesting. So, Ezioma and I have decided to connect our community. We have decided to explore the dynamics of the relationship in the Nigerian community, the dynamics between kids and their parents, and kids and themselves. We're going to adopt or encourage other kids to emulate whatever we see as strength. And then if we identify weaknesses, we'll hope that this program will assist in designing interventions that will help us parents and the kids to have better relationship. And we hope all the parents tune in and all the kids tune in. This is going to be quite a ride. And today we're actually kicking off the program with Mr. Chinedu Joseph Osueke, whose story is extraordinary. I think every child should listen, every parent should grab his or her chair and come close to listen to Chinedu's story. And we hope that Chinedu's story will impact our community in very positive ways and, kind of give a lot of encouragement to kids and those parents who think that who at some point will think either our hopes are lost or that their kids are not going in the directions they want them to go. I'm very excited. I look forward to this conversation. Thank you. And now I'm going to have Mr. Chinedu Seke to introduce himself, or Joseph actually. He goes by Joseph, so whichever one you prefer. But Joseph, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me. I appreciate being on your platform. My name is Joseph Chinedu Osueke. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. I'm from Igbo community there. Both my parents are from Nigeria. I'm from Nigeria. Very strong Nigerian values in the household growing up. Um, yeah, I'm interested in connecting with the community. I'm invested in our community. I'm currently a United States Coast Guard commissioned officer, and I do a lot of things that are very unique every single day. But when I look around, I'm not very well represented. And I know in our community there's a high level of educated individuals, people that I grew up with, very educated. Where as a community we're very resilient, but I think there's opportunities that we could take advantage of in different fields and realms, and the Coast Guard and public service is one of them. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Joseph. We are glad to have you. Now let's get to business. So, what do you remember from your childhood? What was your family like growing up? What traditions did you have?
Well, growing up in Dallas, there's just a huge Nigerian community. You both know that. So some of my fondest memories are just going to, parties on the weekends and being able to see your cousins, eating jollof fries, chicken, running around with your siblings and just, connecting with the people that your parents knew growing up and hearing their stories and how they came to this country. So those are some of my fondest memories. My parents, we grew up in Dallas, and my mom was, studying to be a nurse, and often she took us to work, because we didn't have the opportunity to have babysitters all the time. My father worked at Coca-Cola. He started work 3, 4, 5 a.m. and worked all through the day, usually 10, 12-hour shifts. So there was a lot of, shuffling and bustling in our household. a lot of time management on my parents' part, and that's kind of how I saw um, just the work ethic that they had to make things come together. We didn't have the most money, but as children, we didn't know it. You know what I mean? We lived what we felt was a very good life, and even though we grew up in America, we knew we were Nigerian and we had very strong Nigerian values. So some of the stuff that we were exposed to in public school, um, we had roots at home, so our parents didn't take a lot of the nonsense that we saw outside the household. So very strict household. Education was first and foremost, and everything else came second. But yeah, most importantly, it's just the dedication and the drive that I saw from my parents. Is kind of what is still instilled in me today as I pursue you know. Uh, Accomplishments beyond what I have now. So, yeah,
Very interesting. I'm so excited. I can't wait to
yeah,
dig a little deeper. But before we dig deeper into your relationships with your family, your
hmm
relationship with your family, is there any particular time during your childhood that you remember that was memorable for you, and what made that particular time or incident very memorable for you?
I will say, you know, one thing I remember, especially in high school, you're growing up and you're kind of being formed and shaped by your environment. And growing up in a Nigerian household, you have certain values, but you live in America, and there's all of these things that you see and that you're exposed to, and these pressures to be, one thing or the other. So you're kind of in the middle, trying to adapt. So I think for me, the first time I went home was kind of an eye-opening experience for me because you don't realize, even in the situation and how privileged you are until you go back home and you see some of your peers, some of your cousins who are, you know, if they had every opportunity that you had here would be thriving. And and you see them and you understand the struggle that they have to go through every day to make ends meet, or and the way they carry themselves with so much humility and pride, it made me realize that some of the things or some of the worries, some of the issues that I thought I had were very minor compared to what was going on here. And I think that was kind of the pivot for me, where I kind of realized, like, I'm blessed. I'm really in a good situation here, and it's all. Because of my parents' ability to move from home, which when you hear those stories is difficult too. And you think about just uprooting yourself from everything you've known with $300 in your pocket and moving to another country and saying, I'm going to make it here. There's no going back home, and I'm going to make sure my children make it here. There's something about that story and something about that just stays with you. And even in your hardest times, no matter what you're going through, that is your life force. That's your blood. That's everything that you know. And so, yeah, I would say that's to this day, I still tell stories about it because it was the first time I had to, mix water, cold water, and hot water and take a shower. Eye-opening for somebody who's been able to just run a shower for, minutes on end back here in the States. Fetching your own water, cooking your own food, like literally, farm to table, catching chickens and going through the process of killing it, pulling the feathers. So this is all, and I'm looking at my father like, you do this every day. He's like, this is how we survived here, you know. Yeah, it's a real thing, and you realize like, wow, I have it really good. And ever since that moment, and I haven't been home since then. I want to go back, but ever since that moment, I think just something just switched for me, where I was just like, the problems we have here, they're very minor compared to what some people are going through. So that's why everything I do it with, my community in the back of my mind, my family's name in the back of my mind, and that just allows me to continue to pursue excellence. So
I like how you talked about mixing hot water with cold water and fetching water as a memorable experience. I know some people your age wouldn't think of that as memorable, but I grew up in Nigeria and I still remember that. So, what was your relationship with your parents growing up?
Right. So it was very they're very contrasting people. So my mom is very goofy, very outgoing, very, kind of like the jokester of the family. And my dad was very, it seems at least on the outside, very stern, very stoic, kind of like the authoritative figure. Um, but, you know, for me it was like the best balance of both because growing up you can be a little bit of a knucklehead, but you need that loving and nurturing from the mother, and you need that what they call the stern fist from the father. And I think it was a perfect match for me, especially being the oldest child and just trying to navigate and lead for my brothers and sisters. So they did the best they could, and you don't realize that as a child, right? You think they're doing everything to be against you, or they don't want what's best for you. But it's not until you become, for me, it wasn't until I became a father myself and understanding the sacrifices that they had to make just for me to get like, the little headway I was going. I can't thank them enough. So, often I'm reminded with my own kids, man, I think about situations my parents were in, and you don't understand how they did it, but they made it work. And it was through a lot of prayer, going to church, and we just had like I said, a community. So, if something bad happened, your parents weren't going to be the only one to know. It was going to be your aunts. It was going to be your uncles. You know what I mean? So, you watched growing up. You watched your parents and your uncles, you watched them because they were developing themselves, right? They were still trying to figure out what it was like to live in the States, you know what I mean? So you're watching them go through this process where they're also growing with you.
Yeah, basically, you weren't really just raised by your parents. It was, when you went to Sunday church, you saw your aunts and uncles, and you went to different parties, and you stayed at your cousin's house. So, there was levels. You had your parents, right, that you saw every day, but then, you would go stay with your uncles and aunts, and they had, their own their advice to give you, and they would impart wisdom upon you. So there was just this big umbrella of a community where you knew you could rely on multiple individuals for guidance. And it's just something that when you think about, you know, not a lot of children these days have that. You know what I mean? So, I'm very blessed to grow up in the era that I did, but I also want to make that available for this generation now as well. So that's what I love what you're doing here, with connecting communities, because yeah, I don't go home very often to Dallas, or I don't go home. I don't get to travel to Nigeria as often, when I want to. So, um, the power of, like, internet and social media, I can do that. I can still connect with people who were like me growing up, you know what I mean, that had maybe the talent or had, the drive, but just didn't have the direction. So I would like to guide them and pick their brains. And so, yeah, yeah, it's I'm blessed. I'm really blessed. Yeah, I really am.
Okay, Joseph, of course, that was intriguing. I have a question for you. We're going to get into your career choice and all of that. But before then, you
Absolutely.
said something that actually stood out for me. You said that your parents did what they did their best. So did you always know that? What would you say to a younger Joseph who
Oh
felt
man,
his parents
this is
worked so much and
this,
wasn't there because they were working or for one reason or
oh
the other? You
man.
said your mom was in school, so I can imagine her schedule was very tight. What do you say to that young Nigerian out there who is angry because her parents or his parents were in there, or he thought they were in there? what would you say? Because I'm sure, if I'm wrong, please correct me. I'm sure as a young child or prior to you becoming a parent, you probably had some, maybe some feelings towards what you thought was their parenting style. So please, if you can elaborate on that a little bit for us,
Yeah.
I would appreciate that.
And this is something that I actually was, it's funny. I texted my father maybe a couple weeks ago, and I just out of the blue thanked him for everything that he's done, because I was running helter skelter with both my kids. And I think about all the resources that are available to me now that my parents didn't have, and they still made it work. And I was just, and I asked myself, like, wow, like, how did they do it? How did they do it without mentally breaking down? And what I would tell myself, my younger self, is to assume good intentions, right? To assume good intentions. I I had to come to the realization that my parents didn't grow up in this country, right? So a lot of the things they saw were based on what they saw in the media. You know what I mean? And so what they did their best to just protect us and shield us from the negative aspects of, living in the United States. They wanted us to get a good education. Like, these are things that as a young child you're not thinking about, right? Because you're just trying to figure out who you are and where you fit in, in this community, right? And you don't realize the sacrifices they make. And like you said, until I became a parent, I had to make them on my own. And waking up at 5 a.m. and your kids don't see you, right? And they come home and you're tired, but you're trying to keep up. And they're asking questions like, oh, my dad just sleeps all the time, but not knowing that person has been out to work for 12 hours at a time, right? Putting little money aside just so you can have, you know, shoes and sneakers and, go to post grad, things like that, right? The sacrifices they made. I look at myself and everything that I've accomplished, and it's still hard. You know what I mean? And you think about someone coming here from a country with no navigation or guidance, and to be able to figure it out, and then send off 3 kids and allow them to kind of go on their own journeys, figure themselves out, and we're all pretty successful. That's the American dream to me, right? That's the Nigerian American dream. And it's just something that we don't think about, and it's not talked about very often. Um, but Nigerians are so resilient. I have to hear it all the time when I'm working, and people look at me and they're like, "I don't know how you have the energy. I don't know how you do this." And I was like, and I kind of think to myself, this is all I know. You know what I mean? This is what I watched growing up. So the things that may seem difficult for some people or challenging. Uh, I watched 2 people go through this for 18 years of my life and do it with grace and humility. So I would say they set me up to be in this position that I am in right now. And I would say to the younger generation, understand that your parents didn't grow up here, right? You're going to have to take the lead on some of these things that are happening to you, but they built a foundation for you to be successful. So understand that first and foremost, and take advantage of it, because, you know, there's, like I said, when I went home, there's people that were smart. There was people that were bright. There's people that were just as motivated and enthusiastic as I was, but will never get that opportunity because they never came here. Um, and so I know I don't take what I do for granted. I don't take this position for granted. So I'm grateful for it all, but I do my best to try to pay it forward as well. Myself had to realize as well that these are 2 people who came from a situation where they were just trying to survive, right? And they're trying to put you in a situation to thrive, right? To do better. So it might not come out the way you want it to. And, it might not be, all the love that because there's certain things that they didn't have themselves, right? So they did their absolute best with what they had, right? And I would encourage anyone, right, that feels that way, to sit down with your parents and ask about their stories, right? Because there's things about my father that I didn't know until I was in my 20s. And that's when it started to make sense. Ah, okay. So that's why you're like that. Okay. Because there's certain things that he would go through that I could never even imagine, right? Both my parents, that they survived. And the fact that they were able to make it here is this is such a low probability, if it makes sense, right? For them to make it here. And then for us to come here and have the free will to just choose what we want. You know what I mean? To choose to go to school, to choose to not go to school, to choose to accept whatever career we want. These are opportunities that our parents didn't have, right? They could only go, one or two paths. So, and for most of them, it was just getting out of their situation, right? Uh, um, you just don't understand the generational impact it will have on you and your kids' futures, right? Um, Now, there are things that, I hear it a lot from other Nigerians, my peers, my parents did this, my parents did that. This is all they knew, right? They gave you what little they had, and your job is to take it and multiply, right? So the best thing they could have done for you was give you an opportunity. And at least for me, that's how I feel. The best thing that my parents could have done for me was give me an opportunity, because I did, I did take time to figure things out. It wasn't like overnight. I wasn't, I didn't join the Coast Guard until I was 26. So I had time to try to, do different things that didn't work, right? But my parents were still there, right? They still supported me. I remember um, um, 2 months before going to boot camp, I hadn't lived with my parents since I was 17. And I was living in El Paso, Texas, and I was getting ready to ship off for about 2 months to go to basic training. And I called my father and said, "Hey, I don't need any money. I just need a place to stay for 2 months." And the next day, my dad had rented a U-Haul and drove 12 hours and came and picked me up. We gathered all my things. I went back home, no questions asked. So this is something for me that, if he wasn't able to do that, who knows if I would be able to go to boot camp, because I would probably be struggling to pay bills and, save money and do other things. But because of him, I was able to just focus. So for 2 months, I just trained. I didn't know how to swim. I had to figure out. I had 8 weeks to figure that out. So I took that 8 weeks and figured that out. They gave me the opportunity to come home unbothered. All I had to do was buy groceries, cook, that was my contribution. Cooking food and staying out of their way, you know what I mean? Making sure the house was clean. And once I went to boot camp, I gave my parents a hug, and it's just been, I'm here now because of them, because of that, situation. So yeah, you think your parents are one way. Like I said, my dad was very stern, and I didn't know how that conversation was going to go. But I texted him, I told him my situation, and he just said, "Okay, son, I'll be there tomorrow." That was it. No one else would do that for me. No one.
Oh my gosh, I have teary eyes. When you said you texted your dad and he just rented the U-Haul and came without any
The next day.
questions asked, my heart melted. I always tell young kids, the ones that I talk to, there is no one in this world, and I mean no
Absolutely.
one, that will love you the way your parents do. They may not agree with you on certain things, but there are some sacrifices that parents will make for you that no human being on earth will make for you. In as much as you don't agree, some of us might not agree, or some of them might not agree with their parents' parenting style. You have to understand that these parents grew up in an environment where their parenting style worked for them. It was an environment that was very monolithic. Everybody
Right.
raised kids that same way, and the kids were extremely successful back home. And when they came, at the time they came, they wanted to replicate the parenting style they knew.
Absolutely.
Fortunately, for some young kids growing up in the US, I grew up here also. I always say that one of the most difficult things for a child is to be a Nigerian child growing up in the United States.
Oh,
Yes, your
yes.
parents want to teach you all the parenting style they know, but once you leave out the door, those parenting styles become nullified to some extent. You just
Mm-hmm.
have to now pick the good and the bad. So it's quite interesting. And my goal for doing this is that every Nigerian child who gets to watch this will go back and look at his or her parents and say thank you. No matter how your parenting style was, I may or may not agree with some of the things that you did or how you aligned your priority. But thank you for the opportunity of being here. You have created the foundation. You have
Hmm.
given me a platform, and I hope to use that platform to the best of my ability. That's the reason for this show. Anyway, that's going to lead into our next question, which is, what did you want to do? I think you kind of mentioned a little bit of what we were expecting, but what did you want to do growing up? How did you end up as a Coast Guard? And what did your parents want you to do? And how did that align or conflicted with what you ended up being?
Um, so I was a very, I would say, imaginative, very dramatic child. So I actually wanted to be an astronaut, you know. So that was my thing. And then once I started getting into sports, because you go around your peers, everyone's playing football, basketball. Um, I wanted to be a basketball player, like every young kid growing up in the States, right? But I'm limited by my height, so I was only 5'11". So I had to start being realistic. My parents, growing up, they wanted us to be, the typical doctor, lawyer, engineer. You hear it all the time, right? And so for me, that at the time didn't align with what I wanted to do, which is very funny. So I resisted. I naturally resisted for a long time. I wanted to go out and go to college, but like I said, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just wanted to move out of my house, right? I wanted independence. I wanted freedom, and I got that among some other things too. And you started to realize, oh, okay, cool. This is the real world. Mommy and daddy's, not paying for everything now. You have to kind of budget your money. You have to budget your time. There's no one waking you up anymore. Okay, this is different. And so, as you get older, your kind of goals and your, things you want to do shift. And so, like I said, once I hit a certain point in my life, I was 26. I said, okay, cool. It's maybe time to look at some other options. I knew I wanted to serve. I knew I wanted to, get some benefits and finish my education. So for me, I started looking at different options, and the Coast Guard made sense. Um, Only thing for me is I'd never been on water ever. I didn't know how to swim. It was very foreign to me. Um, but I looked at it as a challenge. It was like one of those things I would tell friends, like, this is what I want to do, and they're like, you don't know how to swim though, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm gonna have to figure it out. And again, that just kind of goes back to the resilience mentality I knew growing up. You just kind of, you never really, you don't tell yourself no, right. You let other people do that, but you just continue to push. And so it was funny. I remember taking swim classes, and here I am, 26, this very muscular guy, and I'm taking swim classes with like 7 and 8 year olds, and they're just flying by me, swimming back and forth. And I'm here just, one step at a time, struggling. But in those 8 weeks, I learned how to swim. So when I went off to boot camp in New Jersey, like I said, I wanted to get into like the intelligence field. I really wanted to, get into like high levels of government. And so that's what I wanted to do. I finished boot camp and I went to my first unit, which was Seattle. And now I'm a deckhand, for this 378-foot ship. We're in the Pacific Ocean. I've never seen the ocean before. I'm watching dolphins jump out of the water. I'm watching, sharks. I'm seeing all these different things I'm exposed to. They're teaching me how to drive this ship. So I'm driving a ship in the middle of the ocean, this 400-foot ship. And then now I'm, doing engineering, right? I'm doing these engineering rounds where I have to learn different specifications of engines and turbines, things I'd never been exposed to before. And, I'm asking my colleagues, like, oh, I've never done this. And they're like, oh, well, you have to figure it out. And so, you know, it could have been overwhelming, but again, it was just like one of those things. All right, well, I made the decision, I made the leap. It kind of goes back to, how my thought process, I'll figure it out. And so I did that for a year. And then once that year was up, I was able to get selected and go to what they call Operations Specialist School. So this is kind of like another thing that's a whole nother career field, but it's more of like search and rescue, law enforcement, planning, preparation. And so I went to school for about 4 months in Northern California, finished it near the top of my class. And then, my teachers were telling me like, hey, you're pretty good at this. And they sent me to Miami, which is like one of the, most chaotic ports in the country when it comes to this. But still, it didn't feel like something that it didn't feel like anything I couldn't do. And so the first day I got there, we had a search and rescue case where a little girl was on a jet ski with her father and ran into another boat. And so this girl broke her leg, and the father was injured. And you're just hearing all this chaos on the radio. And so you have to be really calm, and you have to communicate in a way that you need to give and receive information so you can pass it along and get people out there. This was my first day, and we were able to save this father and this daughter and get them to safety and get them to a hospital. And that's kind of where I was just kind of like, okay, cool. This is something that's very unique, but I get an extreme amount of joy and passion um, when knowing that they were safe. And so it was just kind of like a spark for me. And then I did that for 3.5 years where it was just like night and day. You're working 12-hour shifts, you're working 2 days on, 2 days off, you're working nights. So it's very arduous work. Some cases went extremely well, some weren't successful, but you learn and you grow. So once I finished that job, I went and was stationed on a national security cutter, and this was in Alameda, California. And this job, I didn't know, there was no description for it. It just said, they just said, hey, report um, on this day. And that's all the information they gave me. So before I had to report, I went and did training with the Navy in Pensacola, Florida, with no experience. And so I went to this school, and the first day, I'm talking to these, different Navy people, and it's an electronic warfare school. And I said, electronic warfare. I was like, what am I doing here? You know what I mean? And they're kind of describing what they do. And that's when I realized, like, they sent me to this training to become the subject matter expert for my unit. So I went to this training, did 4 months, and again, I did very well. It was something that I wasn't familiar with. You're learning about, different defense weapons that Navy ships have, and all these different things that are completely foreign to me, completely familiar with. But you just adapt. Something clicks and you adapt. You turn in, you lock in, you say, all right, cool, I'm going to figure this out. I don't know what I'm doing right now, but I'm going to figure this out. And that, if you haven't noticed, that's kind of been a theme for my life. And so I did that training, and then I went off to this boat in Alameda from 2018 to through 2021. I did this for 3 years, and I saw so many things. Again, search and rescue. We did heavy law enforcement and drug seizures that made national news. I got the opportunity to spearhead a drone pilot program where I went to the woods and the mountains of Oregon, and I learned different aspects of these drones we had acquired that were about $2 million, and it was uh, a small company that was outside of Boeing called In Situ that they had these drones that they were flying. And so I was like one of the first people to get the mission coordinator qualification. So again, this is something that's completely unfamiliar to me, right? But I just took it on with with optimism. At the end of the day, I said, okay, cool. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll figure this out. And it ended up being one of the most rewarding and coolest things that I've done in my Coast Guard career. And that's what eventually got me to the position I'm in now as a commissioned officer. So I left there in 2021, had a small stint at a district command center there, and then I went off to officer candidate school, which is a 17-week school in New London, Connecticut. And here you're with people who have been also selected for their leadership potential, right? And you're being groomed to be the next future leaders of the Coast Guard. And so it was very tasking physically. It's very demanding academically as well. It's one of the most academically challenging officer candidate schools uh, between all the military branches, in my opinion. And so I finished that, and I wanted to become a Marine inspector. I told um, I told my teachers in OCS that's what I wanted to be, and they looked at my resume and they said, "But you have all this experience doing, X, Y, Z, and you're very good at this. You have all these accolades," and I just wanted to try something different. Um, so that's what I requested, and then I got selected for it. So again, I come to another unit here in Los Angeles where I don't. I'm not a naval engineer. I'm not a naval architect. I'm not a mechanical engineer by any means, but I'm working with naval engineers, and so now you're putting yourself in environments with these high class, highly developed, intelligent individuals, and to me, it was the best thing because you now become a sponge, right? You're trying to grasp and learn all these things on your own, and you're reading and interpreting certain things, and then you have these people with so much knowledge and experience to kind of fill those gaps. And I think that's why I've been so successful here. And so now, this is 2 years ago when I got here, and I'm leaving next year, but now I'm qualified to inspect oil tankers, offshore oil tankers that carry hundreds of millions of crude oil coming into the United States. I inspect container ships that carry, packaged goods and all your deliveries from Amazon. We inspect those boats before they make it into the United States. Bulkers that bring in, fruit, food from all different parts of the country come through the port of LA, and I inspect those. In addition to that, you're put in charge of these like high dollar projects where these boats are reconstructing, and it can cost up anywhere from half a million to millions of dollars, and you're in charge of kind of going through the step by step process of making sure they do everything correctly. If you told me I would be doing this 10 years ago, I would say you're crazy. But it's currently, this is my reality. And it's because that I've always gone into a situation knowing that like I'm capable, and I knew I was capable because of the community I grew up in. I watched people who, like I said, built, in small, increments, built their legacies, built their businesses. I saw people go from, you know, peers to doctors. That's not uncommon to see in our community. So like when I'm faced with challenges in my current role, I realized that I've been raised around excellence my whole life. This is not new to me to do these things, and it's just something that's stuck with me uh, uh, throughout my entire life. Even when things weren't going well, I still had the idea, the notion like things are going to turn around because that's just how life has always been for me. Um, and that's just the mentality I was raised with. So, like I said, I'm blessed, and I'm glad I'm happy you're allowing me to share my story, and hopefully, it touches someone or someone, can relate to it because um, I didn't always know what I was going to do, but I wasn't afraid to jump. I wasn't afraid to take a leap, and my mom would tell you that she knows I will, without even thinking, like just go, and I'll figure the rest out later. And I probably got that from her. So yeah.
Oh, I like the way that you put that, that there's nothing that you can't really do if you put your mind to it. And there comes my next question. Most Nigerian children think that they're going to school to get a degree for their parents. So when you went back to school, now you went back as an adult, did you think you were doing it for yourself or you were doing it for your parents?
I think it was one of those things where when you're young, right? When you're 17, 16, 18, you think you know it all. You think you know how everything is going to go. And so for me, I was just like, I just need to get somewhere, right? I just need to go to college, right? I just need to go to school. So that's how I ended up in El Paso. Again, it was one of those things where I thought, oh, I'll just go try to play out, try out for the basketball team, make the basketball team, and everything will, go uh, as I thought planned in my head. And it didn't go that way. And I think one of the strongest markers of adulthood is when that happens to you, when you think life is going to be a certain way and it doesn't go your way. And I think how you react to that kind of dictates how the rest of your journey will go. So for me, I was going to school, but I wasn't doing well. I wasn't managing my time. I wasn't um, I wasn't focused on getting my degree and finishing, right? I wanted to do all these different things, and I ended up just kind of overwhelming myself. So I had to take semesters off. And so what happened is I took one semester off, which became two, which then turned into a year. And then it was a struggle trying to get back into school. And that's where me and my parents really clashed because their whole foundation of me leaving the house was to go get an education and come back home and make something for yourself. And it just started like this resistance, right? And so it was me basically trying to, I guess, clean up the mess I had made, right? Because to me, I was like, oh, I'm not going home until I've rectified this situation. That's the stubbornness that I had, right? So I was doing these different things. I was, doing these odd jobs, trying to make things work, and I was doing just enough to get by, right? But just enough to get by was not okay for me, and it took about 7 or 8 years before it was kind of like, okay, cool. I would say I was maybe 23, 24, where I was just kind of like, all right, whatever you've done at this point, start kind of, circling back because it's time to start reevaluating where you're headed. And so for me, I was working two jobs. I remember one night job and one day job just to kind of, catch up on bills, because I still had student debt and things like that to catch up on and just to have a roof over my head, you know. And again, this whole time I was trying my best just not to um, burden my parents, you know what I mean? Because they had my brother and my sister to worry about as well. So for me being the oldest, it was just kind of like one of those things where I could have just went back home after the first little hiccup or like the first little inconvenience, um, but I just continued to try to figure it out on my own. And then it wasn't until, like I said, when I got to that age where I was like, I had, like I said, I already knew I was going to the Coast Guard. I had, little bit of money in my account. I was making ends meet, but wasn't living lavishly at all. But I was looking at the next 2 months, and I was like, okay, cool. I didn't want to continue to pay for rent where I was living because there was no reason for me to be there anymore. And so it was like kind of one of those things where you know for me it was hard. It's like, oh, I have to call my mom, I have to call my dad and let them know. But you know how your parents are. You know your parents better than anyone else. And I knew I couldn't just call them without a plan. That just couldn't
Yes.
do it, right? And so I started just, cleaning up little things, making sure everything was kind of squared away, crossing my T's, dotting my I's. So when I called my father, I didn't tell him everything, right? I actually don't think I told him I was joining the military because I didn't know how they were going to react at the time. I told him I was getting a government job and that I needed just a few months to just kind of like cool off, right? Just to kind of like get my head straight, not have to worry about bills and just kind of focus. And like I said, I had basically like this selling point that I was going to tell my dad, like, and I didn't need it. I had all these things and he just said, son, okay, now you really, because I guess he realized like you've been through it, right? You've understand that it's not easy, right? And I think he knew that I had been through it, and he was just kind of like, I got you. Don't worry, I got you. And so when I got home, it was almost for me, um, those 2 months were just like bonding moments with my parents because they saw how hard I was working to get to where I was, going to go, as far as like the training and studying and the diet and the workouts. Um, and so they supported me, right? They asked me what I needed, and to me, I was like, well, I'm in your house now. I'm here. I am 25, 24 years of age, living in your house. Nothing to really show for it. I had been gone for all these years. I said my only contribution is to make sure that I don't interrupt your day-to-day schedule, and for me it was just like something as simple as just making home cooked meals, and cleaning around the house and making sure the fridge was full. That was like the least I could do for them at that time, because my mom was still going and working 12-hour shifts, 5, 6 days a week. My dad was still working the same shift that I watched him growing up doing. They never stopped working, you know what I mean? And so, to me, coming back home as the oldest son, um, it was almost like hitting the reset button. It was like, okay, cool. You're worried about being almost like scrutinized or judged by your parents. And, I got a great deal of that, of course, but like, this is the first time where they understood, like, hey, you're trying. And there was no questions asked. They said, okay, son, come home, do what you need to do. And then when you've built your foundation and kind of adjust itself, go off, you know? And like I said, I left 2 months after coming back home. And yeah, from then on, I was like, there's nothing I can't do, because now I for sure knew that, this support system that I have is that I didn't think was there, right? Growing up, oh, they're against me. It's always been there, right? It just took a little struggle and a little life to happen to me to realize, like, oh, it's always been there. It was just something that I was a little bit stubborn about, and most first generation Nigerian kids sometimes are. You know what I mean? You get caught up in seeing your peers, your American peers, doing things a certain way, and you think how you're growing up in your house, and there's something wrong with it, and there's not. There's cultural differences, right? And you take the good with the bad. And so for our generation, I feel there's so many pros about our culture and the way our parents grew up that we can take, that we can still implement, and take our experiences growing up in America and kind of mesh those things, and raise our children, to have even better lives, making sure that you're sound financially, right? Having 401ks, things like that, that we didn't grow up hearing. These are things that you're exposed to now that you can pass on to your kids, right? But also still passing on um, all the culture that comes with being Nigerian, the resiliency, right? The toughness, the grit, um, passing that on along to your children as well, because that's your parents' legacy.
Wow, Joseph.
Yeah,
One of my friends once said that nobody can ever be great in their comfort zone. And if
exactly.
anybody ever questions that, they need to watch this show with you. Very interesting. Um, there's something that I want to ask you. You said
Hmm.
it took you about 6 to 7 years before you realized that, okay, maybe college isn't for me. I'm not that college is not for you, but the route you were going to get a
Right.
degree probably wasn't the right path for you. What do you say to that parent right now who has a 24, 25-year-old son or daughter who is at home, who hasn't graduated from college, and the parent is beating up himself or herself or the daughter, or not accepting the fact that the decision that the child made is probably what the child wants to do at the moment, or the child is trying to figure out a better route for them. What do you say to that parent, and what do you say to that child? And I'd like to chip this in before you answer the question.
Hmm.
The Nigerian community is marked with excellence. For excellence, we are known for
Absolutely.
excellence. Every Nigerian parent wants the best for the child. But do you see that in some situations backfiring on us to some extent? And also, we're going to discuss mental health
Yes,
eventually. So we're not even going to
absolutely.
get into that with you. But what do you say to that parent and to that child who are struggling right now with getting that degree, or who has been in university forever and is
Right.
unable to get that degree because maybe the path they thought they were going to isn't quite the right path for them before
Okay,
the
I can get that. So I think first and foremost between the parent and the child is communication first, right? Um, you know, sometimes the delivery from Nigerian parents is not the most, loving or gracious, right? And you have to understand that's just the culture we come from. Um, for the child, I think communicating, right, that maybe this is not what you want to do, but having a plan in mind of how you want to accomplish your goals um, can really set things apart. I think um, like I said, for myself, hitting that reset button, right? Kind of like realizing, like, okay, this is not working for me, right? What can I do to kind of pivot? And for me, initially, it was just like, okay, let me just get 4 years of service. I was initially just going to do one contract, but it was getting out of my comfort zone that got me to the position where I'm at now, where I'm comfortable saying, hey, I'm serving and I'm thriving in the position I'm in. And now that I've seen this, I want people to know about this, right? Um, I've heard people. My mom has connected me with kids who have, because I ended up getting my degree in emergency management, and it's one of those things where you're not going to really get a job in emergency management unless you've had experience, right? Right. And the Coast Guard is all emergency management. Everything I do has been emergency management related. So when I talk to kids like that, they get these like, you know, not your atypical like law, engineering degrees. I have to ask them like, what's your goal? What's your plan for that? Because you have to understand you need that. You absolutely need it, right? And I think for the parents as well, we tend to just kind of say, okay, my kid needs to go off to college. And what happens is you see other kids doing X, Y, and Z, but not everyone's the same. And I think for the Nigerian community, we really have to realize that as much as we are excellent for young kids, it can come with a lot of pressure, right? And so for me, um, I would say something about me is that I looked around, I saw my peers, and immediately I was, oh, I don't want to do that. You know what I mean? I don't want, I don't think medical school is for me, right? So for me, that was an easy choice to say, all right, I'm just gonna have to figure out what it is I want to do, and just take the steps necessary. Could I have done that a little bit earlier? Absolutely. Would I be here if I didn't take the steps that I did? Probably not. I'll be honest with you. So sometimes it just takes a little, sometimes it takes life to happen to you a little bit, and parents have to be um, just gracious enough to say, okay, cool, I've sent my child out into the world. I've given them all the tools, right? Because you don't have to be the smartest person. I don't know if you realize that. Yeah. You don't have to be the smartest person. You
Yeah,
do have to have some of the strongest will, though. And I
absolutely.
think if we instill that in our kids, right, no matter what steps they take, even if they make mistakes, they're
Hmm.
going to always fall back and rely on that resilience and that will. And um and and for the parents, right, as much as it's hard to do sometimes, you have to support your kid, right? You have to emphasize and let them know that no matter what you do, you're always going to have the safety net here. And at the end of the day, it just takes communication, right? We're bridging these gaps. We're bridging these gaps between one generation and another. You have to talk, and on both sides, children have to talk to their parents, and parents have to talk to their children. You want to know what your child actually wants to do, right, instead of telling them what they want to do. And for children, I would say, like I said, the thing that um, clicked for me was just asking my parents how they grew up, right? And just kind of putting things in perspective, because then you're able to put yourself in their shoes, right? And you start to realize like there's no way I would have been able to survive that or go through that without, feeling defeated. And so sometimes that gives you a little bit of motivation, knowing that like literally someone has put their lives on the line to make sure that you have the little things that you do have, right? So when you look at it like that, you realize that there's nothing you can't do, right? You know what I mean? Because you don't have to do it alone. You have a community behind you, and you'll always have a community behind you. And I think at the end of the day, if if we just hold each other up, that's all it takes. You know what I mean? No one falls, no one's left behind. Um, and it's not perfect, but I think that's one of the first steps that we can take.
Oh gosh, I like the way that you put it. There's nothing that you can't really do if you put your mind to it. And I really do believe that. And now comes my next question. So, most Nigerian children think that they're going to school to get a degree for their parents. So, when you went back to school, did you do it for yourself or were you doing it for your parents?
That's actually a great question. For me, going back to school was one of those kind of necessary things that I had to do. And again, it goes back to me joining the service because I went to college a little bit. I felt I was smart, you know what I mean? I may have lacked certain resources, but I always felt like I could finish school. So when I had the opportunity to do so, where now I didn't have to pay for it. 'Cause that's another thing that we don't realize. Like when there's a burden of financial responsibility, it can affect how you learn and how you pick up things. And so when I went back to school the second time, it was easy. I'm gonna be honest with you, it was a breeze because I had tuition assistance from the Coast Guard, and then I also got a grant for being in the military, and so it paid pretty much for everything. And so all I had to do was show up and do the work. So that was the difference. As far as getting the degree for myself, it was there was a situation where I was working with a colleague that you know wasn't. I felt like okay, cool. I know quite a few things, and this person was kind of directing me and showing me these things, and I just felt like, oh man, like I don't think I almost felt like I didn't know what this person was. I don't think they know what they're talking about. But you realize this person is telling you what to do because of the position they're in, right? And then I was like, okay, for me, because to go to officer candidate school, you need a bachelor's degree. And so when I started thinking about my career goals and what I wanted to do, this was the stepping stone to get to that point. So I said, okay, well, I have to finish school. There's no question. So I did it for me. But was it rewarding to call my mom and let her know that, I've accomplished? Because that's all your parents want. They just want you to come and get a good education, go off and fly, go be on your own. So for me to send her my degree, and to call her and say, "Hey, I finished school," um, it was it was like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. You know what I mean? Because you want to honor your parents, right? At the end of the day, you want to honor them. You want to make them proud. Every child does. And if they tell you different, they're lying. So for me, um, being able to call her and say, "Hey, mom, it's done. It's finished," and knowing that her sacrifices, the sacrifices she made paid off, right? All her kids have gotten their degrees. All of them. We at one point we lived in different parts of the country. My sister lived in Thailand. Like it's just like it was almost like a dream realized. And so for me, does it stop there? Absolutely not. You know what I mean? You just want to continue moving. You want to continue growing. Um, but yeah, I would say I did it for all of us. For myself, at the end of the day, you have to do it for yourself. You know what I mean? You have to. If you're doing it for anyone else, you'll eventually come to that crossroad. You can be successful in whatever it is you do, and you it could be 10 years from now that you realize, oh, this is not what I want to do. But when you're doing things for yourself, right? The byproduct is making your parents proud. The byproduct is making your family proud. The byproduct is making your community proud. And you get to be your whole self. You know what I mean? You get to be who you are authentically. And I think that's very important. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, for me, that was one of the most. It was a very pivotal moment in my life, and it was motivating as well. And it just showed me like to just continue doing the work. And it's something that I hope every young child in this Nigerian community gets to feel at one point. Whether it's buying your mom a house or starting that first business and making your parents proud because that's a Sunday ritual. All you see, all the aunties and moms and uncles, all they do is talk about what their kids are doing. You'd be lying if you said that didn't make you happy to hear, your parents talking, very positive about the things that you're accomplishing. Yeah, it's heartwarming.
Oh, that's quite interesting. It's funny you said that because I was talking to a young guy not long ago, and the way he was sounding like the degree he wanted to get was for his parents. I said, "Do you think you're going to school for your parents?" I mean, that's
Yeah,
weird. I was telling him, "Well, now your parents are in their homes taking care of their children. I don't think the money they make they send it to their parents back home. Like they're using it to take care of
right.
themselves and their family. I hope you do understand that you go to school for yourself." You know what this guy said to
Absolutely.
me? He's like, Nigerian parents, like he was like, I feel like I'm going to school for my parents because they like to sit around and say my child is a doctor, he's an engineer, he's a lawyer. So
Mhm.
it's for for him, the parents enjoy that more than he does. So he thought the school thing was for his parents. So it's good to clarify that it's not for your parents, my loves, it's for you.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
get
it's
the
definitely for
parents, of
you.
course, we enjoy sitting around and talking about your accomplishments, but at the end
Mhm.
of the day, it's ultimately for you. And
Mhm.
your parents could only push you so far. If you don't get it done, you don't get it done. Listen to Joseph. All right, Joseph. So this is so good. Tell us, what do you have in store next? What is going on? What are you, any projects? What do you want to, is there anything you want to share with the young people watching this? And what intentions, what plans do you have for our community? What can you
Yeah,
bring back to the community that gave you so much according to you?
absolutely. So, moving forward for myself, I'm gonna continue my career. I'm looking at leaving my current unit next year, and I'll be moving on to another unit. Probably doing marine investigations and kind of like furthering, broadening my knowledge in my career field. And then hopefully after that, going on to, postgraduate school. So I'm looking at law, which is ironically, um, I'm looking at industrial hygiene, which is, kind of like a side product of the field that I'm in, and then also transportation management with marine transportation safety and things like that. It's kind of like one of those things that is a booming uh, field, right? Where you're thinking about cyber and different types of attacks on ports. A lot of these ports in the U.S. are moving to uh, automation and using automated facilities. So those have to be safeguarded. So it's just kind of like one of those things that you see something kind of going in a direction, you want to jump on it early. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. As far as projects, like I said, here in the Port of LA, I am managing a few ship rebuilds for small passenger vessels and offshore supply vessels. And so those are, kind of in the range. There's like usually like 100, 200, $500,000 projects that you're in charge of. So it's interesting because you're kind of figuring those things out as you go. But what I want to pass on to our communities, please connect with me. So in the Coast Guard, we have a Pathways to Citizenship program. It's a program where we take legal green card holders who are living in the United States and want to stay in the United States, pursue education. You can enlist in the Coast Guard. You go to boot camp for 8 weeks, and during those 8 weeks, you become a naturalized citizen. I would say we had a young man from Uganda just complete boot camp. Came from Uganda. Of course, he's highly educated, right? But he wanted to stay in the United States, so he enlisted in the Coast Guard. He gained his naturalization, and so now we're working with him because now that he's in the Coast Guard and going taking those next steps, he's starting where I started. And so for me, it's very rewarding because now we have him in the Coast Guard, but he's also a part of our community, right? Because there's not a lot of Nigerian African officers and members of the Coast Guard, so we all know each other. We all communicate. So when you see one, you see their last name, you say, "Aha, brother, come, let me talk to you," and you connect. You connect. So we're all in cahoots. And so once one person comes in, you call that person, you email that person, you keep in touch with them, right? And these are people that are in Virginia, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, Florida. We're all over the country, but we're all connected, right? Via email, phone, whatever. And so now his next steps are, how can we get him to Officer Candidate School, right? How can we put him in position to be where I'm at now and continue passing the torch. And so that's my passion project right now. That's how I give back to my community. And I want to make sure that my community, the Nigerian community, knows that this is an option and this is available to them as well. Because, like I said, being a lawyer is great, but you can be a lawyer in the Coast Guard. Being an engineer is great. You can be an engineer in the Coast Guard. Being a doctor is great. You can be a doctor in the Coast Guard. There's opportunities for you to take advantage of pursuing those career fields, but doing it for free, right? And you serve, you get experience, and you don't have to do 20 years, right? I plan on doing 20 years because I've gone so far. I'm almost at 12 now. So I have 8 more years until I'm eligible for retirement. But even if you just did a 4 year stint in the Coast Guard, you leave um, with benefits, right? You're going to leave with a guaranteed, 4 year degree with the Montgomery GI Bill. So you can leave the Coast Guard after 4 years, get all the experience you need, and go back and pursue a master's degree or a specialized uh, um, trade, things like that. There's different opportunities that are available to you when you serve this country. And my job personally is to get that information out. So please, if you have anybody who's interested or wants to ask questions, please send them my way. This is like what I'm passionate about. This is why I work so hard so I can do these things, sit here and talk to you and spread this message.
Okay.
Oh, Joseph, thank you so much for coming here. I couldn't think of any better option to start this show, to kickstart this show than you. I hope parents watch this. I hope the kids watch this, and we hope to address some of the issues that are some of the issues that we have in our community. But for what you have done, I'd say thank you. Thank you for coming out here. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for the encouragement you're going to give to our young men and women. I have three boys. I kind of relate to you, to what you went through, but I can't wait for them to watch this show and to see you and see what you have accomplished. And also, let me say this: it is so amazing to know there's someone that our people can reach out to. But because when you hear Coast Guard, you don't attach Nigerian name to Coast Guard. So to know that you're there, just I just want to let you know, be ready. A lot of people are going to be reaching out to you, and also you have parents who are scared of sending their kids to the military or to the Coast Guard, to the military, part of the military. So yeah, Nigerians are always so scared to have their kids go. But knowing that you're there, I think will give a lot of them peace of mind. Talking to you about the risk and the benefits, I think will motivate a lot of people. Thank you for coming. We look forward to other people like you, other Nigerians like you who will share their stories. The goal again is to address some of the concerns we have. I think our next one would be on mental health, how do Nigerian children manage mental health and other things that come with it. And hopefully, at talking about these things will minimize the mental health issues, which I think sometimes mental health in the Nigerian community with our children have a lot to do with expectations, or I mean with expectations from their environment or their parents that are not practical. So hopefully when we talk to them, we'll be able to kind of help them understand the reasons certain things are done the way they are done in the Nigerian community, and also help parents to understand how they can support their children when they're out there, and how to sometimes take a little step backwards and listen to your kids. As you said, the most important thing is communication, and letting Nigerians know that there are other Nigerian kids that are going through what they're going through. We just need to connect them with each other so they can properly address their concerns and develop a design interventions to assist them with better managing the environment. Being a Nigerian child growing up in the US is not an easy task, but we can altogether we will manage things and make it better. That's why this show is here.
We share our stories, whether they're funny, sad, frustrating, interesting, or simply very real. We want to hear your story. So if you have not subscribed, subscribe to this channel and also click on the bell button so that you will be the first to get a notification whenever we share a new video. Thank you so much.